Hey everybody, Aaron Bishop here on behalf of the Patterns of Life Bible. When it comes to interpreting the Bible through the patterns that are based in the Bible, one of the important aspects of this that we should really hold on to is that the center of a pattern will give you the underlying text of the pattern or the focus of the pattern. It will in some way highlight the things that are going on in the pattern. It'll provide the pivot point around which a story is told. It'll give insight into why the rest of the story exists or why the rest of the text exists in the first place. And so when it comes to something like the Torah, looking at the law of Moses, or specifically the book of Deuteronomy, getting to that central pericope, that central point in the entire book, can help us to understand the underlying theme or the underlying reason for everything else that exists in the book. Let's take a look at it and I'll show you what I mean. In the Patterns of Life Bible, this is pericope 25 in the book of Deuteronomy. In a normal Bible, it's Deuteronomy 10, verses 12 through 22. Now, I know that might seem very early in the book of Deuteronomy to find the center pericope, but later in the book, when you get to those whole set of laws that are just repeated one after another, those are all their own pericope, their own pattern, and that spans multiple chapters. And because of that, the center of it gets pushed up towards the front of the book. And so here in chapter 10, we find the center, the thematic center of the book of Deuteronomy. And it describes to us the essence of the Torah. Why did God give the Torah in the first place? And for what purpose did he give it? So let's take a look at this and let's find out. In A and A prime, we read of heaven. Now in Christianity, it's common to think of, oh, we're going to go to heaven, or heaven is the place where God lives. Well, in the Old Testament, in the Torah, heaven just meant the sky. It's the thing that's up in the air. It's the thing that's completely inaccessible to humans. It's so far above us, we can't go to it, which is why they would build temples on top of mountains, because it felt as if they were going closer to the heavens. That's why the Tower of Babel was a tall tower. It was an attempt to ascend into the heavens, into the sky, the place where God lived. So in A, we're given this expectation that's put upon Israel by God. What is it that God requires of Israel? Well, they're to fear the Lord their God. They're to walk in his ways. They are to love him and to serve the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and keep the commandments of the Lord and the statutes which he has commanded this day. Why? Because the heaven and the heavens of the heavens is God's, and the earth also and everything that's in it. God claims ownership over all of this. And if you go back to Genesis, it provides the foundation for his ownership of it. He made it. He created it. And if you believe God is creator, then everything that exists is his. And because everything is his, then he can give you commands to do stuff. He can tell you how to live within it because he designed it. And so he knows best how we're to interact with it. When we get to A prime, then we read of what God has already done for Israel to bring them to this point of Deuteronomy, where they're sitting on the plains of Shittim about to enter into the land of Canaan, about to take up the promise that God had given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob so many centuries before. And at the very end of it, we read of God's promise being fulfilled among the peers of this text. They have been made as the stars of the heaven. They've been made into a great multitude. There's so many of them that when you look at them, you can't really count them. They become an enormous population from the patriarchs when there were just a few of them. And when God uses this language of heaven, I have made you as the stars of the heaven, it's almost as if he is inviting Israel up into his space, as if he is including them in his creation and including them as something that's above the earth, something that's greater than the nations that surround them. In B and B prime, then we read of the people of God. In B, it is the forefathers, the patriarchs that God had chosen and their seed after them. So he chose not just them, but all of their children, grandchildren, until the end of time. And he's chosen them to place them above all people. Above all people in what way? Perhaps as the stars in the heaven, which are above all people. They are to be that guiding light in the darkness. In B prime, then, we read of God's claiming these people as his own once again. You shall fear the Lord your God. You shall serve him and you shall cleave to him. Language of husband and wife. For he is your praise. He is your God. And he is the one that has done all of these amazing things that you have seen with your own eyes. See, we get several exhortations to the people of Israel. And we get an idea that's commonly thought of as a New Testament idea in C. In verse 16, circumcise the foreskin of your heart and be no more stiff-necked. Now, what does circumcision of the heart mean? Well, circumcision of the heart, we see right there in the text, the very end of the verse explains what circumcision of the heart is. Don't be stiff-necked. Don't be stubborn. So circumcision of the heart is the opposite of stiff-neckedness, of stubbornness. Circumcision of the heart is a heart that is willing to obey, that is malleable, that is changeable, that's growable, that is able to be made into something new. And in C prime, it's love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. This is something that Israel really struggled with, including people from the nations in their midst. It's something that Jews struggle with even today. They isolate themselves. They set up hedges around themselves. They have a hard time including people from the nations in. And with good reason, because the nations have done nothing but persecute the Jews for multiple millennia. And so them including strangers into their midst is hard for them to do. And expressing love outward to those strangers is a very difficult prospect for someone who has known nothing but heartache and pain from those strangers. But Israel is exhorted to love the stranger because they were two strangers at one point. Now, it's important to understand that there are several different classifications of strangers in the Bible, and this is a very specific type of stranger. This is the word ger, and the ger isn't just anybody from the nations. This is a friendly foreigner who wants to come and be friendly with you. The hostile foreigner is not included among the ger. And how do we know this? Because they were strangers in the land of Egypt. They were ger. They were friendly foreigners in the land of Egypt, and Egypt turned against them. They were friendly the entire time. Even as they were escaping, Israel didn't lift their hands against Egypt. It was God who lifted his hands against them. Israel was friendly to Egypt and showed love for them, and it was exploited and used against them. On the other hand, there is the hostile stranger, which is a completely different Hebrew word. And so we have to understand that every time it says stranger in the Bible, it's not just talking about the foreigner who comes in and lives in your midst. It's not that guy that's moving in order to overtake or overthrow your country. It's the person that's coming in that wants to be part of you, that wants to be joined to you, who isn't of you, but wants to be close to you. And in D, we see the central heart of the Torah, the other part of it. For the Lord your God is God of God, Lord of lords, a great God, and mighty and terrible. In the New Testament, we read of it as King of kings. This ultimate authority, this one who is in charge of all others. He is the one who has power over those who have power. And he is the one who is mighty and terrible and great and does not regard any person. And his qualities that are described here teach us how we are to live. He does execute judgment for the fatherless and the widow and loves the stranger, or that ger, in giving him food and garments. God loves the vulnerable. He loves those people who have no other people looking out for them, who have no human structures that are preventing them from absolute destitution. God loves these people, and he wants their good. And his desire is for Israel, for the people of God, to live up to supporting these people, providing structures in order to lift them up and to provide that base foundation where they won't be completely without recourse. This is the center of the book of Deuteronomy, and it is no surprise. It should come as no surprise to anyone that the center of the book of Deuteronomy tells us, in the beginning and in the end, love God with all your heart, all your soul, all your might, and all your strength. Just as Jesus said when he was asked, what is the most important command? And what is it that's nestled in the center? Love your neighbor as yourself, that stranger who's in your midst. In the New Testament, it's the story of the Good Samaritan, that person from another nation who was acting in kindness towards the people of Israel. It says the ger, love them as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. Include them in, bring them in, support the vulnerable, support the orphan, support the widow, support those people who have no way of supporting themselves, because God loves them. Jesus didn't come for the healthy, he came for the sick. He came to lift people up out of the dust and the dirt and the grime. He came to support people who were vulnerable, and that's how we are supposed to act. The center, the essence of the entire Torah is love God and love your neighbor. the two most important commands, as Jesus pointed out. It should be no surprise that this is the center of the Torah, because Jesus himself says it. On these hang the law and the prophets.